Thank you, Kubra, for the introduction and also for setting the context. Welcome speakers, co-panelists, and to everybody else who's listening in. I'm sure, as Kubra said, this is the end of probably 1.5, 2 days of interesting deliberations around women entrepreneurship at IIM Bangalore and the NSRCEL. I think women specifically, the women's cohorts have been pretty popular for a long time, and we take a lot of pride in the fact that the ecosystem has actually mentored and put together a lot of entrepreneurs in the women's space. When we thought about what the conversation theme should be, and I think all of us here have worked with women, are working with women in different capacities, and we thought, why not figure out what is that specifically we look at from an MSME context in India. And interestingly so, I mean, just to prepare for the session, I said, let me just read up a little bit, and then 2-3 interesting pieces. One is there's a study by Kriya University, I think, which was done in April of this year, March and April of this year, across 6 states, about 2,000 women-led enterprises, MSME specifically, and a post-COVID impact. One of the interesting lines that I read in that report is, of the businesses that shut down, 70% of them don't want to return to business. I said, oh, this is interesting. And just some thoughts that came in. I said, oh, they don't want to go back to doing business, whatever the reason be. The other piece of information, and I think this is also something all three of you probably have dealt with, is the female labor force participation rate. We keep reading about it, we keep hearing it, and it has nothing to do with small town, large town. It just talks about women in general. And the decadal growth rate, it has fallen and it continues to fall for women in India. Of course, those of us from economics also understand that counting concerns are here in terms of saying that, well, it is basically not that people are out of labor force, but maybe paid labor has not been reported for. So I think this sort of set the context for what I think we should talk about today. And the other thing is, about female entrepreneurship in general, because we have been talking about women entrepreneurship a lot. So I want to probably, open this up with starting with a question, and the question is for all three of you, based on the common question, and you can, give me what your thoughts are, and then we can take it from there. I read and I also meet women entrepreneurs. One of the things that I feel is not properly understood or misunderstood or represented is the word women entrepreneurship or female entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is entrepreneurship. Does entrepreneurship have a gender connotation to it? And I want to understand from your experiences, where is that setting? Like, where does it go? Siddhika?
Thank you, Archana. And that is such a relevant question and bang on. Entrepreneurship really isn't different. Our challenges, our questions, the life cycle of our businesses is very much the same, right? We start from saying, hey, what is my business plan? Who is my customer? What am I going to do differently? Where am I going to get the resources? Am I building the company? So the life cycle of a business is really not man or woman oriented. When you really dig deeper and ask questions to both sets of entrepreneurs based on their gender, it's really the issues and the problems and the way those problems are solved is where the differences lie. So entrepreneurship in itself is really not different for a man or woman, but the way they really approach problems and the problems that face them is what causes or creates that difference. And I'll take a minute to just, kind of tell you one small thing. For me, in the last year, when we've been interacting with women across the length and breadth of this country, one of the basic things that comes to us all the time is access to credit. And where and how do we get access to credit? I don't have a CIBIL score. I'm probably a thin file user. But how do I get that 20,000 rupees, which in the mindset of traditional finance is not a business loan. But for me, it is a business loan, right? I am starting a business. It may be something from my home. And that's really where a lot of the challenges really lie for women. Am I audible?
Yes.
Sorry, my screen got stuck. Yeah.
Thank you. And that was good. I think that's relevant and contextual. And I wanted to start this with the woman to say that it is not very different. Praveen?
Sure. So, see, I represent Moneyboxx, and we are into tier 3 and below cities. And, we feel that women are better money managers. And that's why, if you see our loan portfolio, 95% of our loan consists of either directly to women or women as a co-borrower. And so we are just a 2 years old company, and we have now lent around 100 crores to all of these entrepreneurs. And our is a very, very small ticket size. We are into 1 lakh to 3 lakh rupees ticket size, where these women or these entrepreneurs, I would say, instead of saying women, they're just starting business, or they're just starting to commercialize what they are already doing. So if you see our profile, we are, as I said, we are in tier 3 and below. You will find 3 basic kind of businesses. One is animal husbandry, which is cattle or dairy. The second one is small shops, kirana shops. And the third one is small services, maybe tailoring, beauty parlors, etc., etc. So all of these very small kind of thing, where earlier they were either by way of their passion, or by way of their way of living, probably they were doing it, but they want to now commercialize it. And there we are where we step in. And first of all, so we have to train them as to, first of all, we need to actually educate them and make them aware that it can be commercialized. And then it comes to things. So, and I would say that we're doing really good in terms of our NPAs, and I feel that is only because 95% of our loan consists of women.
Okay. I think and that's something that's proven in the microfinance space as well, right? I mean, women as borrowers and repairs. And I think that's the reason the same thing came up in a conversation, because having done audits for women enterprises, nobody's ever complained about performance of women, saying, okay, yes, they are. But when a university research that women don't want to go back to business, probably, that's when you start asking the question, what else is needed other than just credit or access to credit? So Nat, in the many years that you have worked in the system, and you have been supporting or even maybe helping, advising, investments in these kind of spaces, what do you see is the difference, specifically that women entrepreneurship or women entrepreneurs bring? And is there a difference that should be talked about?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. First of all, I did think entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs, right? It takes certain skill set to be a successful one. And so that should be the same. But the more I thought about it, particularly in the smaller segments, as we think about not even micro, but nano entrepreneurs, nano enterprises, I did go back thinking there is significant difference between men and women entrepreneurs, or to the challenges that women entrepreneurs face. And I think my line of thinking was along this line, right? Which is, when you are in a formal enterprise, there are certain guidelines that, company policies and processes, HR, all of that provide some kind of guardrails to provide opportunities to people to kind of have code of conduct and, provide equal opportunities, those things. Although we're not there where we want to be, but there is some semblance of that. But as you get into those informal enterprises or unorganized sectors, you're really on your own, right? It's a jungle out there. And I think you have to do things by yourself, and there's nobody really looking out for you. So I think the challenges multiply manifold, right? I think to me, I began going down that stream of thought and said, boy, our society is very different, right? We all said and done, a significant amount of patriarchal thing is what we have. There is certain imbalance between how men look after families versus women. These are stereotypes that we all know and talk about, and hopefully it's changing for the better, but there is still a lot of it still there, right? So there is a certain amount of expectations, family responsibilities that women shoulder, along with having to run this enterprise. So it puts an significant amount of burden on them to do things differently. And the society also looks at them differently, right? They may not have ownership of property, which means getting access to credit is that much more difficult. That's true for any nano enterprise, and we'll talk more about it, but more so for women. So I think just to get your, the answer to your question, absolutely, women entrepreneurs, being a women entrepreneur is significantly more difficult. They face a lot more challenges, and I think there are layered, and I think we can unpack each one of them as we go. So I'll stop with that for now.
Thank you. think that's the context of having to talk about even women and entrepreneurs. And the reason I ask this question is when at NSRCEL, when we work with women entrepreneurs, I have a co-mentor, Malvika, and at times we end up talking about women's problems, personal problems, as much as their entrepreneurial problems. And we realize that the women's network, the support system that women need, and I'm not saying this is a gender specific trait, but also the fact that women don't see, it's not seen that they need to take, like, for example, mental health issues around women entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs in general, they definitely need mental health support, but women entrepreneurs probably need more of that. So just to add some data and then probably flow into the next bit of this conversation is most women, when employment statistics are looked at, whether it is from the government of India or any other studies, almost 60% women report self-employment in India. That's very interesting because the formal sector employment, and it is very funny why labor force participation talks about only women in the formal space. And like Nat, you said, women in the formal space don't have to really worry because they're probably protected with so many other things that institutions offer, which is there. But entrepreneurs don't have any such institutional support. And women who are self-employed very often don't necessarily are paid employees. It is like, so the concept of the care economy in India, the three C's, cooking, cleaning, and caring for the elderly. Data shows in the last 2 years has gone up, which means women who even did some kind of employment of work at home or participated in employment now report that the amount of work that they do at home has gone up because people are more at home. So I think that's standard. That data is there. The other aspect is that women are not. So the unpaid economy aspect is much higher. So the question is, how do women balance productive and unproductive, or productive and non-productive tasks? And this brings it to the question of when we say entrepreneurship, and and I'm sure all of you work with, of course, Praveen, you work, Siddhika also works directly with women entrepreneurs, women in the sector. The question I have is what are the top 2 or top 3? Is it education? Is it digital literacy, financial literacy? In your experience, let's say at Moneyboxx, what are the top 2 challenges your beneficiaries, the dairy group that you work with, face? And how do you think your intervention is helping them?
Sure. So it's a very good question because, once we start working with the women entrepreneur, then only we get to know the problems faced. And what we feel is that, first of all, at a very first level, the realization itself that what they are doing can be commercialized is the main thing, because up till now they were doing whatever they are doing in their sphere of life for free for their families, friends, etc. But when they realize that they can make money out of it, and they can make their family's life better out of it, is a big realization for them. And then once they do this, then we need some kind of financial literacy in terms of their documentation. As Nat said, generally all the properties, etc., is owned by the men of the house, and all the work is done by lady of the house. So that's one disconnect where we face a little problem. And we start educating them as to what it means when you start getting money in your bank account instead of cash, what it means when you start paying your dues through your bank accounts instead of cash. And within that 5-6 months of, I would say, a credit history build, some transaction points build, then how we can help you, either it is Moneyboxx, either it is Mahila Money, or any fintech, how any financing company can help you in expanding what you're doing. So that financial literacy part is the most crucial thing, because first thing when you go to a women entrepreneur, she will say, I don't need a loan. I'm doing good in my life. Right? So you need to educate, and the loan cycle for us itself is around 2 to 3 months. So that's what I feel is the biggest thing. And once you are there, you have given that education, they have, I would say, they have tasted the blood, then they are tigress of the house.
Thank you for saying it so pictorially. I can actually visualize the entire tigress of the house part. So I think the reason this question also came is I was doing a study recently. Part of the impact work that we do on women and domestic violence, right? So domestic violence and empowerment as a paradigm. And this has always been a challenge in my head as to when you talk about empowering women, access, finance, all that is great. But then, when we dig deeper with women, we realize that it is not just the finance that is available, it is access and control over the resources. I mean, Nat said property rights. At the Nudge, we're working with specifically women and land rights. And we realize that, oh, it's a lot of things to get them to understand, but even then standing up, right? So I think it comes down to certain tougher decisions. So like you said, when you start working with these women, you realize that, well, they need to start thinking of how they can improve themselves. And that itself is probably a journey in itself. So I mean, just to follow on your question and, go to Siddhika again, because it's fintech. So Siddhika, in your experience, I mean, of course, with Mahila Money and as well as in the past of working with women, what is the financial empowerment angle that you have seen which works? Is it just availability or access? Because we keep talking about access, right? Say, okay, you know what, make it available. They're unbankable, make loans available. Is that sufficient, or is there a deeper problem or a deeper aspect that we need to look at? And not necessarily stereotypes and patriarchy, but in between the two, is there a landscape that we should worry about? Yes.
Absolutely. There absolutely is. And, Archana, you've touched on so many different points. I actually do want to take a minute and kind of step back and get into each one of them, right? When you talk about labor force participation, yes, the participation of women in the labor force is decreasing, but so is, so is it for both genders. There's just a supply and demand gap. So there aren't enough jobs being created in the market. And it is India's time to shine as the maker or the hub of entrepreneurs for the world, right? I mean, that is our way to go. And these entrepreneurs are the ones who are going to create more jobs. But we can't sit here and expect, hey, jobs are suddenly going to get created in a market which has probably been stagnant for a very long time. That's just the beginning. Now when you dig deeper and you say, okay, people want to be entrepreneurs and they want to be, and I'm saying people for a reason. Now, everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. They want to start something. And when we've been serving women, there are three main real issues and barriers to being able to set up your business. And finance is only one of them. Access to credit is only one of them. Two very, very important pillars is you don't bring one part of you to work. You bring your entire self to work, right? And this is something that we say in every organization. And therefore, when you look at a woman holistically, one of the key things is what is her support system? Who is there to listen to her? And when you were talking about, network, talk about, for instance, I don't know if you guys have watched English for English, but with Sridevi making those laddus at home, right? I mean, she's making laddus, but her husband never looked at that as, oh, this is a business. But when she heard the word entrepreneur, that was a whole different level for her. Similarly, what we realize is a woman who's starting a stitching business, let's say in a Nagpur, or let's say in an Ahmedabad, versus someone who's going to start a beauty salon in, a Thrissur. Where are their role models? Who's the woman who's been able to say, hey, I've taken this parlor in my city and I've created 10 other parlors in my own city. I franchised it, right? There is that business support, role model, relatability that is just completely missing. And that's what we're creating in form of a community on our platform. So you can, meet more women who are like-minded, who are doing something similar, but in another part of the country, or maybe even in yours. The second part, which is really, really important, is, again, not financial, but is the access to tools and resources. Now, what do I really mean by that? So many women come to us and they're like, humne abhi tak business nahi register kiya. Do we need to register our business? And, that's when you realize this woman has never been counted in the workforce. She is not going to be counted as an employee, as a micro entrepreneur, because there is no registered business, right? And we're only counting registered businesses. So this woman who's baking from home is never going to be a part of any statistics because she hasn't put herself out there in the formal space, right? Now she doesn't know whether she should be applying for a GST. How does she, go about the entire GST process? Someone who's baking doesn't know they should get an FSSAI license, how easy it is, how cheap it is to get that license, what more she could do by just getting that license. Similarly, for all of these top 7, 8 tiny industries of entrepreneurship where we're seeing more and more women get into, it's not just credit, and you're absolutely right, but two very important things: where's the community, where's the relatability and the role models, and two, where is the access to the resources, right? How do you make it completely available and accessible to her without it seeming being like jargons, because remember, this isn't the same person who's unfortunately, she's not the woman who, or the person in the family who's been spoken to about finance or told that, hey, this is your responsibility, you go and take it forward. So she doesn't understand jargon. She doesn't know what a liquid mutual fund is versus an equity debt fund, right? Like, that's not her core skill set. Therefore, how do you make all of this available in the most simple language to her? So for us, that's been the learning.
Thank you. And I think thank you for saying that, because the support system world, right? And also role models. And that's probably what we do at the entrepreneurship kind of cohorts. And it's important in a discussion like this to point out that those are more probably important things that we need to think through as well, as a support system for women, other than just the technical aspects. Nat, just to take the continuation of this conversation, in your supporting and working with women-led enterprises in the ecosystem, what did you see as, maybe the top hurdle other than this, or even just to add on to this, that they have faced and you've been able to see that, well, it has evolved. So in 20 years, do you think you saw it earlier and now you don't see it? So it kind of gives us hope, saying, you know what, in a two-decade cycle, some of these things will disappear. So are there some such trends that you've seen early on which are not there anymore?
Yeah. So this is based on investing in probably about 8 or 10 primarily lending institutions who are lending to MSMEs in general, but most of them happen to be women borrowers as well. So I think a few things I'll say. I mean, yeah, I think both of you, you talked about access to credit is only one part of it. It's a big part, but there is a lot more to it. So I would start with, and this applies to both men and women, but I would highlight the women part here. One is aspiration, right? Aspiration and attitude, right? How many of them are real entrepreneurs versus opportunistic entrepreneurs or lack of opportunity entrepreneurs, right? I mean, there are many of them, and for both men and women, I would highlight. So I think one is to understand that and tease that out, and that's an important thing. The lenders are also looking for which entrepreneurs will win, right? As in, make it big, scale up, bring the money and all of that. So to some extent, there is some demonstrability that's required on the part of an entrepreneur to give confidence to the lender. Hey, this is a business we want to bet, right? Again, men or women, doesn't matter. So I think that's a common trait, that aspiration is an important part. I think I'll put that out there. Then particularly for women, I'll go back to society, right? And society plays a big role in terms of, not encouraging them or even hampering them, right, as they get on, particularly certain professions. So there is this livelihood company that we invested in, which does skilling, right? And one of the big things is something like a L'Oreal certification or salon. In some pockets of tier 3, tier 4 cities, that was frowned upon. They didn't want their girls to be in the beautician business, right? I mean, there are certain stigma attached to certain things, and which is all gone. And now I think it's better. But I'm just saying, 4 or 5 years back, a father or a mother would not let their daughter to get in or say that I want to be beautician, right? I mean, but they've thrashed those hurdles away. I see enough of them coming and starting their own franchise, not just be a beautician in some parlor. They actually start their own and they do really well. But I think that's the journey that we are on. There are so many such subplots or subculture in different cities and different villages that we need to understand and break open to make it happen. So society and what it impedes is important to understand to make them big, because we've just put so many artificial hurdles on everybody, and more so for women. And I think to understand it is important to be able to then say what kind of solutions or interventions are needed to break it open. We can offer all the credit you want to those villages or to that families, but if they stop from becoming a certain kind of an entrepreneur, what will they do, right? I think so. I think it's important to understand what does society do to help them and so on. And then it's a laundry list of things. I mean, education and skills again, right? It's goes back to aspiration, and it's important, right? How do we? I think like Siddhika talked about, do they have the capability to understand the jargons? I mean, forget even equity and debt. I'm thinking even more, you understand what credit is, terms, and how do you get the best terms from your supplier? How do you negotiate? I think that, and I'll even, do a more laymanesque way of saying that women being able to manage tough customers and tough suppliers, right? I mean, it's not easy. I mean, in corporate, women have climbed that ladder and become successful. But when you go to a typical village, a tier 3, a tier 4 town, they're expected to be a certain way, right? Men folk expect them to operate a certain way. So to remind somebody to make a payment, to, kind of pester them to get the payment is not looked upon. So these are very subtle things, but it does have a bearing on how the business, for a business to get payment within 30 days versus 60 days is a big deal, right? You run out of operating cash, and these things women are hesitant to go back and ask, right? These are real things. So I think we'll have to work through some of these things and help them understand business is business. It's not about being nice, at the risk of hurting your business. And how do you, go from there? And I think on the positive side is women are really good at collaboration and community and taking care, right? That's what's relationship building. I think that's what really, really works for them. So how do you retain it, but also kind of build some more of this, I'm going to say cutthroat, and I don't like the word, but how do you do what you need to do to help yourself a chance to succeed, right? I think that's something that's extremely important. And credit, we'll talk enough about it. We'll come back to it for more. But to me, these things are important. And finally, balancing home and business, right? I mean, everything said and done, you need to run back to feed your child or cook or take care of your mother-in-law, whatever. Those things really exist, right? Other than if you get past the urban society, they feel guilty about it. So they kind of manage it so well, but these do put undue pressure on them. And also how society perceives them. Hey, you're not going to be, you're going to be gone for 2 hours in the afternoon. Nobody will man the shop or run the shop. So those are, real issues, and we'll have to figure out a good way to manage. And I do have some ideas, but we'll come back to it when we talk about solutions. But these are real issues that they face.
Thank you. And I think this is a good setting, for the rest of the conversation as well, because I'm happy to note that we're not just talking about what's not working, but also things that have changed, and that that has come through in the place. So we're okay. We understand that women, we have challenges, and women have challenges, and it has nothing to do with whether they're urban or rural. They just face the same set of challenges wherever they are. The question then I have, and possibly a bit of a thought on a theme around MSMEs in particular, and you said nano, and there's also the VSEs, the very small enterprises, and Siddhika used the word 20,000 loans. So it's like just very, very small, almost negligible amount in terms of even support. The question then, the context of that question would be that is it, which is the problem to deal with first? And I want to bank upon your experiences to start. We know that this is going to be a constant conversation, but in a context like this, where we're saying that one is the women's participation in the force probably has gone down, a COVID context, in a post-COVID context in smaller towns. Probably the pressure on them to take care is, maybe things at home are not that easy, and thereby they have to handle things much more, like you said, Nat, and thereby, I used to run a sari business, I can't run it anymore because it's not even considered priority. And there is also enough evidence to say that women as entrepreneurs are more, as you said, opportunistic and need-based. They don't do it out of the luxury of entrepreneurship. They do it because they need the money, because they don't have enough money to maybe even run their households. Now, in that context, what is the larger problem? Like, what is the first thing that we should deal with at this point of time, maybe as urgency? Is it skilling women? Is it inspiring them? Is it policy change? Is it, I know the answer is all of it, but from where you come, let's say, Praveen, you worked with women, right? Dairy farmers. What do you think you want to do first to make sure that they don't shut down businesses and move away and they stay? And of course, credit plus what else do you think is more important right now, maybe let's say in the next 6 months?
Sure. So see, I would like to not specifically talk about women because entrepreneurship is entrepreneurship. But what I would say is that, at a very high level, broad level, if you see 1.36 billion population, then 20% of population consists, and 2 trillion or 2.6 trillion kind of economy, then top 20% consists of 1.5 trillion, and rest 80% is rest 1 trillion. And if you see below 50%, it is only 30% of the total GDP. So, which means approximately 600 million people at a level of $700 to $800 per year. So that is the population where we need, because formal financing is catering to the above of the pyramid, right. And this below the pyramid is where we need to focus on. And so the problem there is first of all, reach is the biggest problem. Because of the reach, we are not able to reach to the right people. And as Nat and Siddhika also said, apart from credit, we need these supports in terms of how we can bring these people on board in the formal financing. So when we started Moneyboxx, what we found is that microfinance is doing a phenomenal job. Up to 50,000, 75,000 loans. They are everywhere. They are doing more. I think there are more than 250 or 260 registered microfinance, and they are doing phenomenal job. Although, when a group loan guy wants to let's say graduate to a individual loan without any backing, that's where the problem starts. Because then the formal finance guy says, you're not ticking my checklist. You don't have PAN, you don't have this, you don't have that, you don't have asset, etc., etc. And the microfinance guy says, I can only give up to 50,000 for group. So when you want to graduate from, let's say, a group finance, a very small business, to your own, let's say, a small shop, that's where the problem starts. And that's how we feel. That's why we started, and we said within Moneyboxx, we will only do this segment where the people are graduating from microfinance to an individual loan, and it should be unsecured. Because if it becomes secured, then security is something which is not available within India, whether it is societal security, asset security, or even life security. So that's where we felt that, okay, loans without security and with a decent size where they can start their journey, which is where they can start their economic journey. So that's our product, and that's where we feel, I think, we need to focus. Because although it is good for us in terms of business, because we don't find any competition, but as a larger society, I think that's the area where there is still a gap.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think follow on to Siddhika is the same, like the same context, right? You guys are running a digital platform where I think the declaration is that technology is the mainstay in this activity. Now, post COVID scenario, and maybe as you work with women in the time frame, do you think that, so there has been digital divide that has probably worsened in this period, with people knowing that, access is much, access to technology and access to technology services is much limited. If that is the case, then let's say an intervention like yours, does it automatically have difficulties in terms of what it reaches, or is that going to be a leveler? So do you think it's going to level out the playing field for women in terms of access, or does it still mean that this technology is going to continue to stay a barrier?
I really think it's time we do two things. One, technology is really not a barrier. We're so new, and we launched our app so recently, Archana, and yet without advertising, without going out into the market and saying, hey, we're here, we already have women coming to us saying, hey, we want help, right? So, and these are women who have smartphones. These are women who already have access to technology. We, because of COVID, have the adoption of technology has been accelerated beyond anyone's imagination, right? So over time, and you have all of these wonderful projects in the pipeline. You have the Reliance Jio smartphone coming up. You have NPCI working on how can you do offline payments through a feature phone. So, at a policy level, because you touched upon that, at a policy level, there are so many changes in the financial space that are already happening. As organizations now operating in this space, it is up to us how we leverage these policy changes and really take it to the end user, in this case, whether the woman or the man. But it's really up to now these fintechs to really take those policies and harness them and make them useful and use them to the user's advantage, right? But at the level of what is more urgent and what do you really kind of cater to first? Mindsets are hard to change. Like Nat said, there are so many, societal issues. There's the issue of inspiration, aspiration, opportunistic, or, really doing it because you want to do it. Here, I want to say something which is probably not going to be liked by many people, but you know what? Women do want to create an identity. And in almost 80% of the users who come to our platform, it's not about mere paas time hai, that's why I want to kill my time. That's probably the fringe cases. But I want to be something more for my family, where they're not looking at me as the woman in the kitchen. It's genuinely a drive to want to do something, right? I want to be that woman who can get out of my home and say, hey, look up, like people are looking up to me. I've earned something. I've done something. For instance, on Sheroes, which is Sari's, first kind of internet platform, we have something called Shop on Sheroes, where women who have never done any form of work are suddenly on a platform doing social commerce, and they've gone from 0 rupees of sale to almost 1 lakh rupees of sale in a month, right? And that kind of inspiration that she is now providing to other women in the community is massive. So you suddenly see like you suddenly see an exponential kind of effect, because it's almost like snowballing. You see someone who's done something from nothing, and then you're like, hey, I can do it too. And women are very good at I can do it too, right? You just need that push. You just need to know there's someone out there who's also done it. And lastly, I think always for that woman who is on the periphery of, I want to do something, but I don't know what and I don't know how, it's just providing the right tools and support. It's really providing that right resource, that right community, and that overall holistic counseling. And that's something that we hold very, very dear to what we do at Mahila Money. It's how do you take that relationship, which may have started with credit, but goes over and beyond that relationship of credit, right? So how do you talk to her about what she's doing? Does she know how to price her goods? Could she price them better? And even when you touched on subjects of, domestic violence, as you said, there are so many issues, and this is an issue at large. And I'll tell you a tiny story. Before we started off Mahila Money, we were talking to lots of people out there on field, and there's this one guy who is a very senior ex-RBI director, and he was telling us in a small Assam village, there was a lot of NPAs happening, and suddenly, one fine day, all of these women, suddenly started. There was zero NP. Basically, it went from almost like 10% to zero. And he's like, hey, what happened over here? Suddenly, what had happened is that this one grocery guy in the town started collecting the money on a daily basis. So these women would come and deposit their money to the grocery store guy. Now, when the woman went home, the husband had nothing, he couldn't beat her up. He couldn't take that money away, drink his alcohol, do what he wanted to do with the money, because suddenly the money was not with the woman in her hand, right? And that's what led to the woman being able to pay on time, because she wanted to pay on time. She wanted to continue what she was doing. She did want to look out for her future. And that really changed a lot of the way we think about how the products have to be, really tailored and offered to women. And that brings me to my last point. Along with the resources, when we say that financial inclusion, right, it's not that products aren't available in the market. They're all over. But how do you tailor this? How do you make it accessible? Is not through digitalization or, just kind of going out there and making them aware about it, but it's making structural changes to products. And for example, a woman, like everyone's been saying, doesn't have assets in her name. How do you ask her for collateral then? Gold is probably the only prized possession she has. Why are we then saying, hey, go take a gold loan because you want to start a business? I mean, that's the one thing that she has in her name. So how do we make structural changes to products is the second part of the problem. And that's what we really need to start working on.
Thank you for saying that. I think that was a follow-on question, but probably because you brought it up, I'll talk about it. And two things that came up, and I think this is that for you to reflect for us here is, one is the financial and the non-financial aspects of inclusion. So financial inclusion has the entire non-financial, and I think that's what we've been talking about a little bit here. And also that the entire approach to women in MSME in the space, and to ensure that they stay and don't fall off the wagon, has also been, is the impetus more on a product-led approach or a customer-centric approach? Because women as customers, or consumers of these products or the financial products are probably a little different, and thereby standard policy, like the example Siddhika just gave, smaller towns, maybe regional issues, and something that, I mean, my work has taught me that women, when you look at empowerment in India, the not one index doesn't help. You have to look at different, state-wise, culture-wise, region-wise differences. So financial versus non-financial, like what is the breakup in terms of the support required? And also, what should it be? Should it still be product, or should it be more customer?
Great question. Wow, this is like the universal question. I think you got
Yes.
everything rolled into one. So I think, few random thoughts. I'll start with something. I know we talked about labor force participation. I'll just make one point there. It's a very complicated measure, particularly when it comes to educated women, right? I mean, when you look at the labor force participation rate, you also see when they hit a certain threshold, they also fall off, right? Even after high education, right? For different reasons. So I think it's a, take it as a random stat, and but I think that has its own implications. But I think I will start with aspiration. I think somebody said, these women do need a means of livelihood. They need to, work. They need to sell stuff and to bring home and make the family survive. I think we're talking about those kinds of, women entrepreneurs. And as I think about them, to me, one of the questions you also had was about digital and technology. I'm a huge fan of it. I mean, to me, that's, absolutely important. And I do think it is a big leveler, right? It really flattens the different hurdles that people have. And I'll go back to one example, but what it does is, when we talked about demonstrable, capabilities or what you do and all of that, people can, in some sense, hide behind technology. At this point, you're not giving opportunity to judge you based on you're a man or woman. You are a digital application that comes through, and these are the credentials of the business. These are the footfalls. This is my yearly turnover, revenue, blah blah blah. I think digital is fantastic. I think as we think about solutions, I will beg them to say adopt digital. Right? I mean, there is just no way around it. Give yourself an opportunity to leapfrog and leave everybody else behind, men or women, right? If you're in digital, and I think that you giving yourself a chance to, smash one of the hurdles. I think that's one. I think the second thing I would also talk about is, different aspects. One is, the culture we talked about, which is difficult. And how do you get involved in a federal kind of a setup, or, call it, MSME clusters, or it could be erstwhile MFI as well, right? MFI was a great success. Where it did not quite work out in my book was, it did a little bit to bring them up, but not enough to, really, get them out of poverty in a permanent way, right? Livelihood and productive loans and so on. But we do have a model, right? So we know women are more trustworthy. We know they're more responsive. We know they're more responsible. I mean, not that we need MFA to tell all this, but I'm just talking that language now. So we know that's possible. And I know few companies now who are taking the cream of the MFI customers who've done 5-6 cycles of loans with them and doing individual credit for them, right? So how could you take them and how could you give them much bigger loans that are, livelihood generating? And I think the important thing is to, make it big, even if it's a handful of people, create enough role models so that people can emulate, right? So that women can say, hey, I saw her. That's exactly what I want to do, right? It is possible. I mean, the power of role models is unbelievable, right? Olympic record is a great example. You need somebody to beat a record and suddenly you see, a stream of people, beating those records. And I think that's one. And the other point I would make is, technology in some sense also removes a certain intimidation factor. I mean, I remember a story, a very senior banker told me long time back, how ATM got adopted, right? ATM was famous because poor people did not have the gall to go meet the manager, right? They didn't want to interact with the bank manager. They felt really scared. They were intimidated. They think they were not good enough and all that. So ATM was very, very good for them. They didn't have to interact with the person. They could just go and do what they want. So in many ways, digital and user interfaces could play that role as well. I mean, when, if women think, I don't have the time, I don't want to go, for people to judge me or whatever, I think digital again is a great example of how they could get past it. So I think that's, to me, if they can get behind some of these things sooner than later, I think they give themselves a great opportunity to succeed, because we know this human aspect of it is much stronger and they'll do really well. It's just that, not being a laggard. And I'd say that for every nano enterprise, not men, women, but since we're talking about women, if they can jump onto this bandwagon, then I think there's no stopping them. Then I think people will, because that's a language that everybody is listening into, right? Big banks and NBFCs. I mean, I know a couple of lenders who are now saying, what other than GST and CIBIL score can I look at, right? Is there a certain, whatnot, different alternate data source or a very big thing now? Can I listen into that data and give them credit based on that? So the women or any nano enterprise owner have to put themselves and talk that language so that they can get on the pathway. And credit is one part of it. As you get credit, you can have many place-based entrepreneurial satellite towns that are opening up, be it in Bangalore or Ludhiana. Game is a great example where they opened up several such things. So how do you become part of it? And all we need is a handful of really successful role models. Then you have the next crop of people, cohort signing up and the next one. So to me, I think we'll have to focus on these things to help, or for them to help themselves, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, it was a difficult, large question, but you answered parts of it, which leads me to probably a closing question. And I don't know how, I mean, I think about 6-7 minutes into the session, we probably have to close. I don't see any questions for you other than the ones I have. I'm going to use my question bank, like Gupta said. So 2 parts. Again, I will first do one set and then see what else we can do. So we're at IIM Bangalore, we're at NSRCEL, we run women startup programs, we work with a lot of women entrepreneurs. What would you want us to do more for the women entrepreneurs, especially in MSME? Siddhika.
I think, one, we need to start respecting, and I'm just going to take our example, right? I have you, and we're here. We're women. We have our own lives. We have so much that we're doing in our lives. We just need to, one, change our stance and not look at them as, hey, they're women and they have so much happening in their lives, but be more like assertive about, hey, you're here to do something. And we need to start with removing that gender lens of saying you're a woman entrepreneur. You're an entrepreneur, you want to start something, let's just start that ball and get that ball rolling, right? I think that journey has to start with us, and it's not going to be anyone else. No man is going to change that outlook till the time we don't change that outlook. So I think that's just one. I think that's where we really need to start with. And 2 is, like I've been saying, we need more and more of that ecosystem, that network to be created where women don't have to feel like, hey, who do I reach out to? Who's my go-to person? Is it stupid to ask this question? Is it okay to ask this question, right? Like, how do we take away that barrier of letting them know all of us have the same question, irrespective of man or woman? And therefore, again, coming back to the first one, it's a vicious cycle. Take away the gender lens and just give them that ecosystem, create that ecosystem much more, and we'll just have more and more women entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs budding across the country.
Thank you. So I think, Praveen, you just dropped off for a bit. So the question I asked was at NSRCEL, we work with women entrepreneurs. What more should we do? So I think Siddhika said we should just take off the gender lens and just say, it is for all entrepreneurs. And we will do that. We'll try and push more of that. And we do work in small towns. Like we do have, our cohorts. I mean, although the Bangalore-based we have chapters in Visakhapatnam and Nagpur where we work with, I'm not saying very small, but we're trying to do that. And we also support women incubation ecosystems in these networks, which help. So the question is, like, what more do you want us to do to help the ecosystem?
So let me answer what we are doing at Moneyboxx and what we feel that, whether it is women entrepreneur or any entrepreneur which requires. And it's a mix of what Nat and Siddhika also earlier said, that it's not only financing. So for example, I'll give you one case study. We are doing it in a place which is tier 4 city in Agra. And it's for our dairy customers. Now, if you go with individual dairy customers, they sell their produce at 18 rupees kg or whatever. But if you collate them, so at one level, we guys are not only financing the entrepreneurs, we are also, I would say, the aggregators of inefficient and companies or ventures with very low bargaining power. So what we are trying to do is that we have 500 customers there. We are collating them. We are going to a large dairy aggregator and saying at what rate you will buy now 50x or 60x produce. The rate from 18 rupees, can you imagine, has become 26 rupees, right? So with the same thing, same produce, everything same, you are able to increase your income almost by 30-40%. Plus, what we do now, we understand that at an individual level, so you can corroborate it for a larger entrepreneurs. Ours is a very, very small dairy. So what we have felt is that issues like vaccination, issues like what to give them as feed, the cows as feed, Issues like how to increase those productivity at their individual level, it's very, very difficult to get that knowledge, etc., etc. But at our level, because we have 500 now, we have 8,000 such customers. It's very easy for us to hire one vet, and who, instead of going a normal, collection agents, a vet can go every month and say, you are doing this right, this wrong, and this is what you can do, etc., etc. So within 5-6 months, we see that the same cow and the same everything, all atmosphere same. If let's say right now they're getting 7 to 8 liters, they start getting within 6 months 9 to 10 liters. So their income just doubles with this kind of things. So what we feel is that as a company, or as a funding agency, or I would say as an incubator, we are also like an incubator for all of these inefficient businesses, right? So as an incubator, not only financing, but also if we can give them support in terms of all of those inefficiencies, that could be really a good thing.
Right. And thank you for pointing that out. I think it's exactly what we kind of think of all the time, that money doesn't seem to be the problem. What seems to be the problem is to ensure, and I think we started this discussion with saying, making sure that women don't fall off the MSME or any kind of entrepreneurial wagon that they've started, and keeping them there, as you rightly said, requires maybe technology, maybe a lot of support, maybe, as you said, technical expertise that they don't have or answers to, and something like a cluster-based work is what at least we've been trying to look at, even in our ecosystem. Nat, as you see it, somebody who's probably seen the ecosystem fairly high up in the startup space, what do you think is one or two strong levers that we need to pull at this stage as ecosystem to make sure that the women MSME sector continues? Like, what are the two large, say, big changes that are needed? Maybe it's policy, mindset, of course not, we've talked about it, but from policy or from maybe the ecosystem support point of view.
Yeah, I think it takes a village, right? It's just requires a lot of things to happen. And I think I would take two steps. It is a gradation of efforts. One is, as Siddhika said, for people to think men or women doesn't matter. I think you're there. As long as you're given the right tools, then you should go and execute with the tools. That's one. But also bad for the other one, right? Not everybody's built the same way. You're starting from a very different starting point. So for those, how do you provide them a safe space with an NSRCEL to say, this is the handholding that's available, and you may be good in accounting, you may not be good in marketing. How am I going to get you the skills that you need, but also make available certain shared services capability that can be tapped by these women entrepreneurs, right? You don't need to do everything day one. How could you, tap into it? Maybe that's something NSRCEL can think about. Is there a certain plug and play capability that they come in? So there's women entrepreneurs very high and passionate on something, but they don't need to wait to learn all the skills, but they can plug into almost a business services type capability to hit the ground running. Nothing like momentum, right? To see a first order come in, to win your first customer, and all of that. I think that has a huge positive halo effect. So get them, give them the momentum, help them with the momentum to, feel good about themselves and, go on. And I think as you think about policies, I would think more accelerators, incubators focused on women, and really role models are extremely important. Bring on mentors who've taken those paths. It's not necessarily people who are subject matter experts, the best marketing person. It's more somebody who's done this journey with them so they can relate to. That's extremely important. You don't need the best person to come and teach them. I think that I would say if NSRCEL can identify a cohort of such mentors who travel similar paths, I think that could be really helpful. Then from a policy standpoint, things like subvention, right? Really do a lot of things to promote women to come in, right? Give them benefits, be it on better terms of credit, or more favorable policies, much like they say 30% of all government procurement should happen for MSMEs, maybe include women entrepreneurs in it, right? As a subset, different things to give them the momentum and get them to some even space, and then they are on their own. And then the bigger things are really promoting entrepreneurship in schools and colleges, right? Delhi is doing some fantastic work in terms of, working in the school system to promote entrepreneurship. These are all, we'll have to do that as well. That will take a long time to roost, but you'll have to begin now to be able to not be in the same space 8-10 years from now.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this was really exciting, right? So one is it gives me hope, and feels, at least I'm sure everybody who's listened in will also feel that, well, we are on that on that trail. The maybe that's not an exponential growth rate, but that it's happening. And I think the support that you are offering to the ecosystem in terms of the work you do, and also the support you've created for yourself. Probably, yes, Praveen. I'll just come back to you. So I think that's exactly what we were wanting to hear in a system like this, especially when we want to use about inclusion. Yeah. So before I close, I'll give it to Praveen, as I think he raised his hand. What is that you wanted to say, Praveen?
No, so only one thing I wanted to say about the policy as well as the
Yeah,
whole
sure.
approach towards the entrepreneurs. What I feel is that we need to segregate, and this is not only for entrepreneurs, I would say for every part of policy making within India, that we need to think urban versus rural population differently, whether in terms of planning, whether in terms of funding, whether in terms of any approach. Because if you say MSME 10 crores and above is micro entrepreneurs, for a women entrepreneur working in rural, 10 crores is a lifetime dream, right? And for an urban guy, 10 crores is like, it may be, I have just crossed last year 10 crores. So probably in our planning, in our policy making, we need to identify various India and then plan and make policies according to those India.
Sure. I think, thank you for saying that. Probably contextualizing, and I think that's exactly something that I said earlier about policy as well. Instead of having standard product, which is a mix, right? And I think that's why your work, what you do at Moneyboxx, or what Siddhika is doing with Mahila Money, will bring about that change. I think your work will help people see when you say small size loans. So thank you very much for giving us hope, telling us that there is enough that is being done, and there's enough thought that's happening. Good luck to your ventures. I hope Nat ends up supporting both of you and finding you more investors as he's here. I mean, I'm putting that burden on him, not that he said that he would do it. It was a pleasure talking to the three of you and understanding the space. Also, I think as we close 2 days of work, and I'm going to hand it back to Gupta to do this, we feel that we've learned. We always look at, especially younger ventures, and being an entrepreneurship setup, we constantly look at younger ventures to come in and offer hope, like you said, relatable role models, right? So I think that's the reason why we want to do that, and try and contextualize as much as possible. So thank you for taking the time out on a Saturday afternoon to do this, and our very best wishes to all of you as you continue on this journey. Kubra, back to you. Thank you.